So how do you guys feel like your parentals, how your parents and your dynamic with your parents have like influenced your emotional intelligence?
In good and bad ways. My mom, as a single parent, as someone super active in her community, as a leader, as all of these things, she had a lot of things to be upset about or angry about. And she was a great mom, but when we got into arguments, it was like Hiroshima, okay? And one thing about my mom is that she, to this day, she can't apologize for anything. I could be like, yo, so-and-so, she will actually, if you bring up something to my mom about something that could be done better, it will be a fight because she takes it as an attack because she went through so much that maybe I didn't see. So for me, it's like, yo, in order for us to be healthy, the, millennial, let's talk about it and capacity in this and stuff, like, hey, like, let's talk it out. She looks at it like fighting words, like, how dare you even say that something wasn't, could be better? Because she had gone through so much stuff that when my sister and I left the house, and when my sister went to school, she went through a deep depression because she just be running for over 20 years, just running and not understanding how things were impacting her. And so when we both left the house, it was like a rubber band. It just popped, and it was just like, yo, everything just hit her that she, for decades, that she wasn't able, like, abuse and abandonment and these kids in the house, and she was in politics, and she's the savior for everybody. And so I mirror that same, me and my mom are just alike, because even though I have more of a capacity to understand where like I'm wrong or we're in this, and I really do try to be like empathetic, I feel like I said the same thing as her. Like I critiqued her, and she was like, "Taylor, do you know how much I do for you?" And all you say, like, I caught myself saying that recently. Like, yo, and understanding that when I did bring that up, that shit is triggering when you do so much for somebody. Like, it's like how do you not see the good in what I do? And those things trigger me. I will blow up, and my natural instinct, like my mom, is to blow up. But I hold it in, and it'll just be that one more thing where I can't even help it. And I just explode because I'm so mad because I'm just looking at all my work, just like her, that I'm doing. Like, how dare you? Like, So my mom is not the best at processing her emotions, and I am working on being better. I just have my hiccups of my, like, explosions. Along the way, because I don't say my true feelings because I'm always trying to be present for everyone else, and I don't know how to talk things out. I don't have practice. So like I commend like my friends where they're like, I can sit down and tell you what bothered me today. For me, like I see that as fighting words. Like what? Like how many things I ignored? Like. So me and my mom are the same that way in how we process.
But you see the thing that your mom does, like, you still think you kind of carry those same traits?
I try to not.
Yeah.
But it slips out. And that's my emotional influence. Even, with men too. With men, I never see my mom in a long-term relationship, not really. So I don't even know how to express myself to men. And I struggle with that. I might say something to my girlfriends. I don't really say anything to guys when they hurt me. I don't know how. And I think that makes them hurt me more because they think that like they just can in all the ways. So that's,
I feel like with my mom, I don't know who my mom is. Like she doesn't have a definitive personality. Like my mom has forever been a sway person. Whatever she needs to be, that's what she's going to be. Like I couldn't say like this is who my mom is because I have no idea. And I feel like that has really informed me because I feel like I rebel so hard against being like my mom, because my mom is the sweetest person in the world. everyone can count on her. She's super dependable. People call her up and she's like, go, she'll drive to Stockton and Sacramento and everything's fine. It's okay. You need this, you need that, whatever. But only I, because I grew up with a house with just me and my mom, that's it. No one else, just me and my mom. Only I know the parts of her that she doesn't allow other people to see. So it's like, you'll go across the country for this dude you're dating. And I'm like, Mom, can you take me to school? Why can't you walk? I'm tired. I did it. I just came from this, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, my school's like 5 minutes away. I'm like, oh, okay. But it's an hour walk, and where we live is super hot. So it's like, that really informed me on like, I really don't want to be that person. Specifically in relationships. Like my mom, I'm sorry if you hear this, but my mom is in relationship after relationship after. She's a recycle. She's always in a monogamous relationship. She's just always in different relationships. Like she has issues with being alone. And so growing up, I felt like I kind of was like that in like my early 20s. Teen years, early 20s, like, oh, I want to have a boyfriend, da, da, da. Because the only time I saw my mom being loving or affectionate was when she was in relationships. My mom is not a hugger. We don't dap each other up. We literally throw up the peace sign when we see each other. Like, we're not this affectionate people. So the only time I saw her, like, oh my gosh, talking in that little, like, oh my gosh, how was your day? Was with her partners, like with the men in her life. So for me, I'm like, okay, well, shit, I want somebody to be lovey-dovey to me. Let me go get me a man. So I found myself being in this cycle of like just dating people and just wanting to have this some kind of emotional connection with people. And now I feel like I rebel really hard against that. Like, I want to be totally fine being alone, which I am. And I like to say no. I like to not have to be this person that people always come to, because to me it's triggering. Like the thought of people like calling me incessantly or asking me for things just makes me go into this like the shell, because I don't want to be that, because I know that if I do that, how I will feel after, and then that's just for me to figure out. And then on the other hand, my dad he's like super in the middle. He's a super neutral guy, but he's also really affectionate. Like growing up, my dad was on drugs and he was just erratic. Sometimes he would like buy me a bike, and then sometimes I wouldn't talk to him for 6 months. But with him, he just was like super, when we were together, he was engaged with me, asking me about my life, how do I feel about things. We playing basketball, we playing tennis, we cooking together. Like we always had a super emotional bond. Even when I wouldn't talk to him for a year, when he would come back, it wouldn't hurt me as much, because it's like I have these things kind of tucked away. And so now today, he's more of the person I'm closer with, and he's informed how I am in relationships. Giving, but also having autonomy. Like my dad and his partner, he'd be like, I'm going to Vegas for 2 weeks. She's like, okay, I'll see you when you get back. That's what I love. He's like, and they have this trust and understanding of each other. And it's not just like, I have to daunt on you and everything else has to pause when I'm in this relationship with you. And so I feel like I've rebelled against who my mom is to be the complete opposite. And I feel like I've become more in line with who my dad is, while also trying to have my own understanding of things, because I do things very differently than the both of them. But yeah.
I think it's interesting because I grew up in a 2-parent household, and many of my friends thought growing up that was like the most wonderful thing, but like growing up, my dad was an alcoholic, so like he was a very volatile, definitely emotionally abusive, sometimes physically abusive, and I used to like beg my mom to like divorce him and leave him, and I never could really talk to my parents about the stuff that was going on at home. And then the motto was always like, what happens in this house stays in this house. So I couldn't go to school and really talk about it either. So for me, I'm like getting emotional about it right now. It's taken me a lot to get the emotional language to be able to communicate with people. it's also, it takes me, even though I feel like I'm in a better place and I can do that now, it is always really hard for me to talk about because the abuse is so deep that even though my dad and I are in a place where I have forgiven him, it's a constant like healing journey. Like for me, this is something, even though our relationship is good, that I'll be dealing with for the rest of my life. And it's taken a lot of therapy. Like I didn't get that from my parents. So in therapy, I've been working on reparenting and really leaning into like, what did I emotionally need as a child? I'm learning about coping mechanisms. I'm learning about self-expression. I'm learning about like advocating for myself as a 33-year-old woman for the first time. And part of the reason I so deeply want to do this work is because I've come to understand how much your parents really model for you how to communicate and how much of that was missing. And I know that I want to have children and I don't want them to inherit that same kind of pain. Oh, don't worry, I'm not crying. It was just a moment. But thank you, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I held it together.
I guess I'll take the floor then. So I grew up in a 2-parent household, right? But my parents were separated, so I had a stepfather. So I had a 2.5-parent household. But I mean, for the most part, my mom was she did it all. So even though my stepdad worked and they're both entrepreneurs, my mom did it all. She did everything. I never seen my mom get tired, is what I'm getting at. So when I say she was always on the go, she was constantly on the go. And I admired that. But also was watching television and seeing that the man is supposed to be doing the majority of the labor, not the woman, right? So for me, my mom she's a stand-up comedian, so her communication skills is lit. Like she's the communicator, she doesn't mind. I didn't realize this until like this year, after dating somebody and seeing the different dynamics between our families, was my family is a very open book. So I have no problem with being open about anything and being the way that I communicate. But as I'm getting older, it's taken some time. I mean, I'm very much of a, like I try to accommodate everybody based on the fact that my parents did accommodate. Like I live with my parents, but we also had my uncle and auntie live with us all their lives growing up. I had my grandma and grandpa. I had like a whole Hey Arnold situation. Like I had everybody in this house. And it was like, so I didn't really get a lot of my emotional connections between that. Because even though I'm in a house full of people, it was my mom's focus was on everybody else. I didn't have any one-on-one kind of bond because she was doing everything. She did have a man. I have a brother that nobody know about. I got brothers, right? And then she had my grandma, my grandpa, my uncle, my auntie, her siblings. So we had everybody in the house. So your attention is everywhere. So I didn't have a lot of attention growing up. So I don't seek it either, right? But what I learned now is that a lot of the things that you experience when you're growing up is a lot of the characteristics that you carry as an adult. Whatever you lack, you overcompensate. That's pretty much how our personalities are made, is what we lacked a lot growing up. So being that I didn't have a lot of communication, a lot of one-on-one time, I consider myself to be a very effective communicator. I consider myself to be very emotionally vulnerable, but things don't bother me as much either though. But I can express you if something bothers me, and I got that from my mom. My dad, on the other hand, different character. He's very emotional. He's the more emotional one. He's the one that's gonna call. He's gonna cry, I love you every day, whatever. My mom is not emotional at all. She doesn't show any emotion, but she's funny and she's lively and she's always present, but she doesn't show any emotion. I never seen my mom cry. I've never seen my mom, I never seen my mom be any kind of emotion. She's always kind of consistently, consistent. Probably because she smoked weed too, but she's pretty consistent for the most part. It's okay, it's legal, it's okay. So I'm just saying, but she do talk on me on her stand-up, actually. So this is payback. So pretty much what I'm saying is my emotional intelligence happened based on my own development because my mom was not emotionally intelligent. We're in 2 different generations. She's not emotional. My dad was in and out. So I had to build my own emotional intelligence. And that's probably why I collected a lot to Black women, because they're more emotional for me. I lack that. So I attach to people who have that. So I think that's where I got a lot of my emotional intelligence from. It's like from Black women, and then also being able to do it on my own, because I didn't have, a lot of men aren't emotionally intelligent. To this day, they're not. So when you find other emotional intelligent men, it's kind of rare. Denzel?
Yeah, well, me and my moms are like these. So I don't know, the epitome of a mama's boy. I think that has a negative connotation for some reason, but me and my mom's, you know, we like these. So one of my best friends, and our communication has been good. I wouldn't say great, because I wouldn't, you know, she's a Capricorn, I'm a Capricorn, so there's only so much communication we can actually affect.
I don't know what that
But you know, like when we see together, we're eye to eye, and like, you know, she taught me about the birds and the bees in the realest kind of way, and I would go to her and ask her questions like, yo, so if a girl comes in, just pull it out, like, what am I supposed to do with it? And you know, she would respond. So we were like that kind of type. She was also very loving, very giving. She's an island woman. And so she would give the shirt off of her back. You know, she would go cook a meal when the cabinets are empty. You'd be like, where the fuck did this come from, kind of thing, just because other people came over the house. But she was a flight attendant, and so she was also gone. And my mother was a single parent after the age of 5. My mother and father, they'd got a divorce. And my father was my man 100 grand too, but he was a musician. So my mother's a flight attendant and actress, father's a musician. Neither of them are from this country. And so my mother's a redheaded, hot-blooded Colombian, and my father is this like music-oriented, weed-smoking, drinking Jamaican, you know, in America, trying to figure all this shit out. And so even that dynamic in and of itself, like the household was a very, very special place, but once you stepped out of the household, nothing looked normal. And then from the contrary, looking into the household, nothing looked normal. And what I realized is there were just levels to my emotional development based on my experience with my family. Just learning the things that I was told from, you know, primarily my mother, you know, what to do, what not to do, what, you know, to expect out of life, those things. And there were the things that I saw, like, you know, after becoming the person that I wanted to become and rejecting the things I don't want to reject. You know, what are the things that I identified with through my, you know, through experience, what I saw. And then there's the things that I learned subconsciously just through just being taught through experience and exposure. And that comes on both sides, the present side in my mother who was there, and then the absent side in my father who wasn't there. And every week my mother would leave the house as a flight attendant. She would leave for 3 days and come back, and she would be there for 4 days. And every time she left, every weekend, it was a knockdown, drag-out fight, because I was a kid not understanding that she had to make this choice to go provide for me to be able to do what she needed to do so we could survive as a family. And it felt like she was abandoning me every week. And she would leave me with my grandmother, and I would cry, and she would cry, but she would always come back. And then when she came back, it was like the best reunion all the time. But she just retired a month ago. And so thinking about now at my stage in my life and looking back about, you know, on the impact that had on me and how that has impacted the way I show up in life. Like, I have abandonment issues for sure. And even though those were on a small scale, it's just, I recognize that when shit doesn't go well for me, my tendency in the past was to turn away and to leave. And when I want love, I want an abundance of love. Like, I want that showered love, like that unconditional love. And so when I find myself seeking it from other people, if I don't get it, it feels less than satisfying. And so now I have this duality where it's like, oh, if I'm not getting what I want, I'm out this bitch. Instead of leaning in to try and get more of it. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then on the other side of it, my father, because he was gone, I made up all these narratives around what my mother told me what was going on with my father that created this life that I didn't want to live based on who I thought he was. And I started making all of these decisions based on how he didn't show up in my life. And so inherently, he then had just as much an impact on my upbringing as he was if he wasn't there. And then it wasn't until I was truly, truly an adult doing this work to understand that my abandonment issues are probably my father's abandonment issues, because she left him all the time too. And he probably didn't know how to show up for himself, much less for somebody who was always leaving him. And so he went out, and he had probably a handful of kids, some that I probably don't even know about, but they keep finding me on Facebook. I got new friends and family notifications every other month, it seems like. But it's just now that I'm getting to the point where I can say, damn, like, he's probably acting out just the way I'm acting out, but in a different way. Because I feel abandoned, so he must feel abandoned. And he hasn't done the work that I've done. And so I can only imagine how hurt he has been and how that's manifested in my life, because I've always gone through life feeling some kind of distance and some kind of disdain for my father, not really giving him the opportunity to express himself and to be there for me, because my mother had her narrative that I adopted. And so just recognizing how much impact that has on my life today and how much importance it is for me to do the work to get to know all of these things so I can make the conscious decisions to do better.
I grew up in a two-parent household, very similar. But my dad was also leaving a lot. My dad was never really, like, he was there. My dad, he said to me 2 days ago when we were smoking, he was like, the sins of the father fall on the son, right? And he didn't mean it in a biblical way. He was just saying, he was like, you know, what I fucked up on, you probably gonna fuck up on, because I didn't know how to not fuck up on it. You know what I mean? And you know, in a very similar way, like if he, that's what he knows. We teach what we know. And so I definitely got a lot of my more manipulative traits from my father. And I love my dad, but I know he's a Scorpio, and he's a very good speaker. No, but you know, but yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, y'all know how to speak, y'all know how to talk, and from very early on, my dad taught me a lot about confidence in self. He taught me a lot about like I remember as a kid I used to wear a lot of like big jackets because I was fat and I had titties, and so you know what I mean. Like I was like 350 pounds and 5'6". You know, so I was big, and it wasn't until high school I started weightlifting. I was on Olympic weightlifting team. That's when I finally started like sculpting. It was the glow, yeah. I got my first girlfriend, everything. I was like, oh, I gotta be Arnold Schwarzenegger in here, bro. Like, okay. But he, like, my dad was the first person to tell me, like, you know, take off your fucking jacket. You know, girls love the titties. You know what I mean? Like, but it was always from the framework of what he knew. And I mean, kind of touching on the point we talked about, like how there's levels to any evolution. You know, and I think part of those levels is also recognizing the space that the, you know, people that taught you were at, where they plateaued, where they're coming from. And I mean, it gives me a lot of empathy. It also brings me a little bit of anger because, like I said, I was homeless, so I was like, y'all niggas knew I was born. You know, I got 2 older siblings. You know what I mean? I knew I was here. I was the youngest, so like niggas had plenty of time to figure it out. You know what I mean? But in like my mom was there, and in a very similar way, y'all said, like, I don't know whether or not if it was my mom was playing a role so well that I couldn't see her, but like as I look back to that, all I remember of her is like her coming home from work, closing her door, and just having a smoke. You know what I mean? But it was funny until it was like, damn, it's been like 4 hours and these niggas is still high. You know what I mean? Or like not high, but like she still needs that space. And so I definitely developed some like affection issues from that because my dad would work and he was, you know, he's pulling in whatever he was doing and he would be gone, and it would just be me and my siblings who were always fighting. And so, you know, it would just be like I'm playing a video game or like in the living room playing on my ear. It smelled like good weed coming from the back, you know, and I don't know where my mom is, you know what I mean? And like I know she's there, and if I knock on the door, she'll answer, but there was always that wall. And then as I progressed in life, I ended up spending a lot of time at my grandma's house. And my granny was just, you know, like, no offense to my granny, my dad knows this through and through, she's not an affectionate person. She's not a hugger, and you know, she's not a hug and kiss kind of person. The last time she was really like that is on my first birthday. But she's never really, and I'm 23, you know what I mean? She's never really been like a hugger, a kisser, or a good job grandson kind of person. And I think especially when it comes to how I view women. My granny's always been very successful. You know what I mean? Like she's always been very financially, and like so when I see her as a black woman, I'm like, yo, like I would love my wife. I would love my my significant other to be college, like educated and have good jobs and have this wealth of information. But then as I try to talk to her more, I'm recognizing the barriers she had to put up because of how she was raised. And that, again, it kind of goes back to that same point. They can only teach what they were taught and what they know. And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I used to hold a lot of resentment to all of them. I was mad at my mom. I was mad, I was mad at a lot of women in my life, especially because I didn't have a lot of strong women show up. I had a lot of strong men show up. I'm definitely a daddy's boy through and through. I look dead on my pops. And I learned I had to reparent myself because of how he didn't get parented in that way. You know what I mean? And like, as I grow up now as a grown man with mommy issues, or, someone that's going through affection issues, I don't want to say mommy issues, but like working through what it means to accept affection, what it means to formulate my ideas of love and relationships, all of that, it's hard to look back on just negative examples. Like what I can take positives, I can take pieces and bits, and I can piece it together like my own, my own puzzle, but it never fully fits into something that makes sense to me because it's not what I'm used to. And history plays a huge part. History is huge, and it's Oof.
It's really interesting how like the men here all have different relationships with their mothers and how you guys have a different relationship with your fathers or whatever, but what I mean, it's just a different dynamic, and it's very weird how not saying anyone's overcompensating, but how it changes, right? So like there's black men who have mommy issues or emotions with their mother, and so they overcompensate by trying to be extremely nice and trying to show up for black or women in general, but so we're talking about black women. And I feel like there's women who have father issues, and since they don't have their father or they may not have a strong relationship with their father, they overcompensate that way too. But there's also women who have relationships with their father, and then they also show up for black men too. So I feel like maybe black women are having different relationships with black men in a different way. Because it's not like we don't love our parents or anything. It's just that the way that they showed up for us is how we show up in other ways. If you long for your father, then maybe you may show up a lot more for black men. If you have a great dynamic with your father, you may show up different for black men and vice versa, if that makes any sense.
I think it can also depend on the person too, because I have a little sister, and my sister and I are very, very close. But we both have daddy issues. I don't know a better word for it, so that's just what I'm gonna call it for now. We both have daddy issues, and for my sister, that manifests in her jumping from relationship to relationship and always looking for someone to kind of like emotionally take care of her. And for me, that has manifested as me being like, fuck everybody, I'm gonna do my own thing, like I'm gonna hurt them before they hurt me, or I'm not gonna be in a relationship, or I'm just gonna date everyone that I can at the same time. I'm like revealing, no, I'm just kidding. I'm revealing all my secrets, no, but it manifests in different ways. So like part of my therapy and being able to move forward with my father has allowed me space like in relationships to show up more vulnerable than I was able to before. But there's still little ways that I see it. Like I'm married, so with my husband, it was really important to me. I never wanted to get married because watching my parents like war with each other for so long, I was like, if this is marriage, I don't want any part of this. Like, don't count me in for it. But the reason why I got married to him is because he made me feel emotionally safe and very stable. So I always felt like no matter what happened, if the deck of cards fell, like he would be there to help clean it up. And I couldn't always say that about my father. Yeah. So I think for different people, it just depends. Yeah.
As a black woman with mommy issues is like something I don't really hear a lot of other women talk about, because I feel like it's kind of hard to say something about someone who was always there. Like my mother didn't necessarily do anything wrong. Like she wasn't abusive. She didn't like abandon me, but we just never had this emotional bond. And so like growing up, people were like, oh, how's your mom? I'm like, she's great. It's great mom, great, good family, you know, all that kind of things. But as I got older, I just realized how much that deeply affected my relationships with people, because I'm just a person to this day who just feels like I don't belong anywhere. Like I'm just this drifter of life, and I can land here, I land there. And I've become okay with it. I've convinced myself I'm okay with it. But as I've gotten into therapy and as I've kind of like explored that more, because my therapist is like, how's your relationship with your mother? I'm like, it's great, it's wonderful, great time. She was like, okay, well, you know, what do you remember about your mom like growing up? And I'm like, I don't remember my mom growing up. And she was like, well, that's a problem. And that really just kind of informs how I deal with people. Like, it's so easy for me to be like, all right, I'm done with this. Or for me to like detach from people, because I never really fully I'll let people get about right there, but I never let them hold on. And being a Black woman who does work within the Black women community so much, it was a struggle at first. Like I've never been a person to have many friends. I wasn't really close to my sister growing up. I wasn't really close to like any kind of women, so I kind of had to dig deep and find that. But there's a large community of Black women who have mommy issues. There's, and I think we're more scared to talk about it, because it's easy for me to be like, my dad wasn't there, he sucks. Yes. I'm not fucking with him. But to talk disparaging against your mother who like did all these things, it's so hard for me to this day.
It's that I gave you life, and that just sticks with you.
It's not even, like, the older I get, the more I really do understand that because she stayed, she went through a lot. Like, I didn't see my mom get, you know, beat up before. I didn't see our house almost go under eviction. I had huge issues with college financially. I didn't see her, like, go bald, like losing all her hair because of stress. Even the way that she lives now causes me like a lot of pain. And I know that she does, so it's hard, like it's hard to be so critical of someone who is, you know, has sacrificed so much. And you know, it's funny, because men have never really been in my life, my neighborhood. Everybody grew up with one parent. It was almost like me asking you, do you have 3 parents? And you being like, nah, I have 2. Be like, ooh. Like, we all had one. I mean, that was normal. And I remember like imagining my wedding, and it wasn't until years later that I never imagined a groom in there, because I did not know what that was like. And I think to this day that I won't say that this doesn't have a negative balance on women. So I think I'm still a good person in that. I don't think I'm like, I overly, you know, blah, blah, blah. But for men, like, I let them get away with murder because I'm always in my heart feel like they're gonna leave. I met my dad at 18. He was just such a bad person, like, to me and my sisters. Like, it was just years of me just trying so hard and never arguing, never bringing up all the ways that he hurt me, but me feeling comfortable to talk about that with my mom. So in that way is an example of how, like, I felt comfortable to be like, yo, even though I wouldn't get an apology, and I know that she wouldn't hear me out loud. I know she would hear me in the back, because she'd be like, Taylor, I bought a 4 Loko home. I'd be like, thanks, because that was my signature drink at the time, over 21. But I feel comfortable to be like, Ma, like, but with my dad, never, because he could at any point just dip like before. And with men now, like, again, like I had said before in the other episode that, you know, I don't really share how I feel with men, and I don't know how to. I literally, like, I've never seen like good communication, planning over a long time. And my friends from home, like, I don't know if it's probably because of our New York culture, we don't talk about that. My best friends, like, have gone through really, it takes somebody ending up in a hospital or ending up with someone who has a huge drug addiction and has things going on for me to even hear about their relationships with men that they've been in for years. Like, we don't talk about stuff. Like, you know, like, so for me, I couldn't even understand how to communicate with guys from my friends at home. We never had the conversation of like, even like, I lost my virginity. It wasn't like that. It was like, we was like all watching TV and a sex scene came on and everybody, it was in 9th grade, everybody had something to say. And I was like, bitches, the fuck? Like, I need to hurry. And then at that point, I was rushing around to, you know, not be that, because I didn't know what that meant for me to be 15 and a virgin. So I'm like, I can't do that. Like, because nobody even, we don't talk about that. Even you was talking about the birds and the bees with your mom. You know, when my period came, my mom was just like, the pads is in the cabinet. And it was like, all right, like, but that was normal, that was fine. We don't really I don't hug my mom either. So it's really trial and error with guys, but I always tried the same thing, and it's always the worst mistake, because I would rather do something that works 25% of the time and fails 75% of the time than maybe try again in a new way where I have no idea, like it might not work at all or whatever. And I don't know how, like I'm just winging it every time.
May I also add that I think as we're talking about upbringing, like one important thing that I think about with upbringing is like I was poor, you know what I mean? Like I was broke, I was in deep East Oakland, you know what I mean? Like, and the only options that were around, like when my dad left my mom, you know what I mean? The only options she had were to go to LA, you know what I mean? Now she's happily with her new person, and you know, shouts out to Robert. But like, you know what I mean? Like, but yeah, shouts out to Robert. But like, but the thing was, it was like, who else is she gonna run to? You know, like not run to, but like who else is she gonna have within the community? Like I was blessed to have not necessarily not a house full, but it was a community full. I can walk down the street if I was hungry and the Clumps would feed me, or the Jones, or you know, or this family, or my dad helped this guy 10 years ago, and you know I could get food from him and his family. But it was never like, it was, you know, I'll knock on the door, use the bathroom, because I was a kid and that was like our community. But I recognized as a man, or as a young boy at that time, that it was, you know, it helped that I was a young boy, because my sister wasn't doing that. You know what I mean? Like my sister wasn't able to do that. But it was just weird to see the difference. You know what I mean? Like my mom had just her. You know what I mean? She was working, she was struggling just like we were struggling. Everybody was struggling and doing what they had to do to survive, not just feel good, not just, you know, find someone that respects your boundaries. You know, like, you know what I mean? Like yeah, exactly. Like, exactly. It's like, what can you do for me now? And I think like that's the thing. Like Black people have continuously lived in survival mode, and that's why I'm saying like when I'm like as addressing the systems of it, it's like, yeah, I feel bad about it, but I can't hold that personally, because I can't control it. I can't control what the crack era did to my great grandpa. I can't, or my grandpa. I can't control, you know, what my uncle did when he was 17, you know what I mean? Or what my brothers were doing when they were young, shit like that. And I don't know, like it's hard to not take that history personally, because it's like it affected me, you know what I mean? Like what my mom did affected me, and of course I was hurt, I was booty tickled completely. And if I didn't work to you know, like, okay, hold on. Have y'all never heard that phrase?
No, I don't know what it means.
I was butthurt completely. I was so tickled. And
I'm sorry, it's a very old, like, that's funny.
that's what I'm saying. Y'all caught me off guard. Yeah, but I was booty tickled, like for real. But just like you were saying, like having to, the first time hearing about, like learning about those boundaries with the 33, I feel like as our levels are progressing, you know, that first time gets younger and younger. And, you know, and the goal is to have that first time be, you know, as you're a kid, from your parents or from your community. But, you know, like you definitely wish that was earlier for your parents. Like, and even now I try to do that shit. I try to do that same conversation with my grandma, you know, and that, you know, that's a fight, you know what I mean? Like that's a fight for no reason. We got into a fight over syrup because I told her not to yell at me. You know, I was like, please don't yell, you know, it's syrup. I shouldn't have to defend myself about syrup, you know what I mean? Like it shouldn't be that big. Like we shouldn't be like toting pistols at each other because I grab low fat versus regular. You know, like that's not like, yeah, I'm helping. You feel me? Like we in this together. But I mean, I definitely like y'all brought up the lack thereof of that language, and also the lack thereof of space for communication. So we don't know we don't know how to say it, but we're feeling it, and we also don't know when we can talk about it. So we get caught with all the other 14-year-old girls proverbially, and you know we're 3 years behind, and now everyone's like, well, damn, now I got to catch up. When half of them was lying, you know what I mean? When half of them was lying, and because they was in the same group last week. With the same look in their face, like, oh, I'm not supposed to be a virgin. Yeah, me and Tony. You know what I mean? But if we take that and zoom out, that's a lot of us. You know what I mean? There's a lot more of us that would need that help, that desire that help.
I feel like too, I was reflecting on like who I did learn my earliest emotional language from. And I feel like a lot of it was my friends, and some of that was like really good because, you know, we got to communicate, or sometimes we had to have blowout fights and we still loved each other. But like sometimes it was also really bad because there would be moments where people would lie, or they just didn't. I think for me, especially around like relationships, like I've taken so much advice from my girl and guy friends, and now I'm like, that actually doesn't apply to me. And I need to be working to figure that out on my own. But a lot of my understanding of how a relationship was supposed to go was based on my friends. And my friends didn't have great models for that either.
So my teacher was Living Single and Family Matters and The Cosby Show. Like that's why I'm so theatrical to this day, because like I learned about things like there's an episode where on Living Single where Maxine friends from college come and she's like, I'm getting married. They're like, oh, where's the guy? And then this woman walks in. I'm like, oh my God, this is so crazy. And then it's like that was my introduction to like, wow, women could be with women. Wow, do I want to be with a woman? You know, like my mom never asked me about anything of those things. I didn't really have friends. I have siblings, but they never lived in the household with me. So that was always like my conversation piece. Like, wow, okay, so how is Maxine dealing with this? Maxine got over it. Okay, maybe this is not so bad. And so talk about a frame of a frame to like have not even real people. But I feel like I'm also grateful to that in a way, because I feel like it kind of showed me how you could process things. Like Maxine at first was like, how you not gonna tell me? Did you ever like me? You know, doing all these things, but in the end she's like, you know what, you my girl. It's all good. And so it kind of taught me how to process things and to be more accepting of the things I don't know and how to work through them. Because in a sitcom, it's only 22 minutes in a sitcom without the commercials. So from the beginning, they always had a resolution at the end. And I feel like that's kind of how I operate now.
Listen, that was probably the better way to do it than listening to these raggedy ass kids. So, in compound to this, so like my initial introduction to sex, it was always like, this is something under 15, and you know, we didn't even talk about like my period or anything, like me and my mom. So it was always like, don't do this nasty, da-da-da. So I'm like, all right, you know, whatever. And then I heard everybody's doing it, I'm like, shit. So I'm literally throwing myself at niggas at this point, because I felt like, you know, me walking through the hallways, you know, in my mind knowing that I'm a virgin. Even it got brought, it was crazy that same week, because New York kids are mean as shit. Y'all are lucky that I'm not mean, like I grew up, okay? So I'm in the hallway and I'm just chilling. There's two older niggas, and they was talking to me about like, whatever, and it was like, looked at me and they say, you probably still a virgin too. Like nobody wants to fuck you, da-da-da, like literally wild shit. And I'm like, so again, like I need to be, you know, in my beginnings, like I have a whole history, but my beginnings was really me in situations that were not safe at all. But I felt like I needed to risk it all, because how dare I be 15 and not be having sex? And so even me losing my virginity was terrible, like, but I just felt like I had to keep putting myself in these bad situations because of like, you know, it meant that, and I was already taller than everybody, like, you know what I'm saying? Like in my year at the time, like, you know, like I was awkward, I tripped a lot. I was very clumsy. Now, to this day, whatever country, whatever city I'm in, like all my new friends that I make all know me as clumsy. Like they say the same thing. It was just not, it's not a bad thing. It's hilarious because I'd be tripping. But like, you know, and it wasn't so that, right? Then I get a little bit older, 17, and I grew up in the burbs in Westchester. And White Plains, Greenburgh, the town. And I started going to Brooklyn. I slimmed down, and I found a really great best friend, another best friend who we were the same height. We would just go in the city together, and I became more bold. Like I got my nipples pierced. I would wear like see-through shirts and just like drink Four Locos and drink and drive to the city, and like men were super attracted to me. And men that I was like, I only see you on TV, like the little hipsters, the little, at the time, skateboarders, and we were hanging out in these warehouses together, and all of these sceney, like popular, like dope Brooklyn boys, you know what I'm saying? And I did not know how to accept a guy finding me attractive and pursuing me. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to throw myself at you. Like, I don't know, like, you know what I'm saying? I don't know, like, do I just sit and because my homegirl, and we were like twins, we looked alike. She would always have the relationships and I would always have just this stupid story. Seriously, and again, like when I said like I don't know how to communicate, like I don't know. When I listen too much, it's like they say that I'm not open up and I'm not talking. When I open up, I'm doing too much. Or when I'm too forward, it's like, oh, that's why. When I'm not, it's like this. It's da-da-da. It never, like, the alignment is, so it's just a whole, these are my emotional influences with things on like a very high level of just always being, like, not communicating with, not understanding, but not being able to communicate to learn and to understand, but also not having the experiences to even try to understand for myself because they will all end up being really, really bad.